I am really happy and excited to bring you once again, by popular demand, quite literally, one of the most downloaded podcasts ever, Mr. Nick Benger. Nick,
Hello.
welcome. The Pet Health and Happiness podcast from Bella+Duke, keeping you at the cutting edge of pet nutrition, behaviour and health, with expert interviews, mythbusters and more to ensure your pet lives a long, happy, healthy life.
Hello, all right. It's awesome to be able to come back, and I hope we can just do these regularly because it's really awesome to talk to you. And I'm so interested in this topic, and I feel like it's just a great opportunity to kind of combine the two worlds and, just put, like, I know today you wanted to talk about separation anxiety, and we can just start, getting a bit more of a holistic picture of what is going on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate you're super busy. For those of you who've been living in a cardboard box away from social media, Mr. Nick Benger is one of the UK's leading expert dog behaviourists. He is regularly on Amazon's The Pack, and he has his own school of canine training. We'll put a link to that below. Not that you'll get in, because he's absolutely sold out for the rest of his life. Kudos, Nick. But he has specialised in rehabilitating dogs with lots of problems, including aggression. And this week, we were covering the hot topic, as everybody returns to work, of separation anxiety. So, Nick, we are seeing increasingly dogs becoming codependent on their owners. And I think that's reciprocal, actually, owners with their dogs, as people have spent now such a long time locked up with their dogs, and moreover, spending a lot more positive time outdoors, taking them for a walk. So we have to go back to work.
Sure.
What are we going to do?
Yeah, you bring up a really great point, Rowan. Actually, I think that's probably the biggest issue that we're seeing right now throughout lockdown is just the amount of separation anxiety cases has just skyrocketed. And I think why that's happening is people are spending all the time at home with their dogs, and their dogs are just really not ever experiencing being left. So this is especially important with puppies, although we have seen it with adult dogs as well. It's so important for you leaving the house, or even just closing them in another room, because that still can be a trigger for separation anxiety. It's so important for that to become normalized. And for a lot of dogs, it isn't normal because we haven't been leaving them at all. So in terms of what we can do, we can start trying to normalize it. There are kind of almost two sides of separation anxiety that are really obvious. You get your dogs that are anxious when they're closed in a room and don't have access to you. And then you have your dogs that get really anxious when you actually leave the house. So you do want to cover both bases when you start practicing. But you can start, if your dog already has separation anxiety, you're going to have to start right back in the beginning from, maybe just closing the door, walking outside, and then walking straight back in again, right? And then gradually we're just going to build up that amount of time. So maybe the next time you close the door and you stand outside for 15 seconds, right? And then the time after that is 25 seconds. And then we just start building up this time until it becomes really normal. Now, there are some mistakes that people tend to make, Rowan. So a lot of people get...
I am intrigued.
A lot of people get a false sense of security because they leave their dog with some kind of chew toy, and then the dog is distracted and not necessarily taking in the fact that you've left, right?
Okay. So we can't simply sucker punch them by averting their attention. They need to be aware you've left to be able to deal with it.
Absolutely. It gives you a false sense of security, right? So you have to be really careful about that. And also, it's almost a bit of a bad habit to get into. I mean, I'm not ruling it out entirely. Obviously, if you just have to go out, and you just need to get it done, then maybe distracting the dog is the best option, right? Or maybe if you're on a Zoom call and you can't have your dog around, then fair enough. But it is a bit of a bad habit to get into, because what the dog can start to learn if they are anxious about being left is that you giving them a chew toy signifies that you're about to go out. Right?
Yeah, that's a really good point you raise here, Nick. That's a really good point. And there's times when I've given Kismet her squeaking alligator and she's looked at me very suspiciously, and now I know why.
Yes. Yeah, so that can be a little bit of a dangerous game to start getting into. But essentially, separation anxiety is all about just pushing that, amount of time left forwards and forwards and forwards. Now, where separation anxiety becomes extremely tricky to deal with is that in order for our program to be successful of that gradual increase in time, we don't want to have repetitions where the dog's getting anxious, right? So, for example, if you're doing your separation anxiety training in the morning and the evening, but during the day you're leaving the dog for 4 hours and they're totally freaking out, well, you're undoing all of the work that you're trying to put in. So that's where it gets really tricky for people to start resolving separation anxiety, because a lot of people have to go to work, they have to go to the shops and all this kind of stuff. And there isn't a great answer to that other than we have to try and find a solution, right? So whether that's having someone else look after the dog while you go out, or whatever the solution is, whether that's family members, dog boarding facility, dog daycare. But whilst you're going through the training, the dog can't be left beyond what they can handle. Otherwise, you're just going to be spinning your wheels.
That's a really good point. And, it's one of these genius points. It's so obvious nobody else has thought of it. It's, and with all the best intentions, we associate more love with more love. But realistically, we are creating a problem if that dog is then no longer able to be left by herself or himself. Sure. And I know with my doggo, she looks really put out if she's not invited to everything. And where I live is quite relaxed, so you can eat outside and the dog expects to be there with you. And you can hear her kind of freaking out as you drive off, which is actually quite heart-rending, when really she's got a whole garden to play in. So it's something. So from my perspective, I should get used to, and so people can kind of empathize with this and see what's happening, using your template. We should get used to leaving Kismet in a room and coming straight back in, and also leaving the house for 10, 15, 20 seconds at the time and coming back in, so she can see that she's not been left indefinitely.
Yeah, the funny thing is, you almost want your dog to think that it's boring. It's like the only dog training we ever do where we want the dog to think, oh, this is boring, right? Right? Like you just
brilliant.
You want the dog to just think that, oh, there's Rowan going out the front door again.
Or
right?
off.
Like it doesn't even register as something that is anxiety provoking. However, if you're going to do this successfully, you do need a pet camera. You do need some way of monitoring if they're getting stressed or not, because otherwise you're never going to be able to set that bar, right? You might go out for an hour and you don't know if your dog's freaking out the entire time or if they're not. And actually, I do think that that's something that anyone with a dog should do, because there was a fantastic documentary a couple of years ago called The Secret Life of Dogs. I think it was by John Bradshaw. And what they did is they filmed a lot of dogs. And what a lot of people don't realize, a lot of people have dogs that have separation anxiety and they just don't even realize, right? Because the dog isn't destructive or going to toilet in the house, but they might be freaking out the entire time and you just don't realize, because when you come home, they stop doing that behavior. For those dogs that live like that, that's such a horrible effect on that dog's welfare, to be in a state of complete panic throughout the entire day. So it is really important to rule out, if you have any suspicion that your dog might have separation anxiety, I'll definitely get a pet camera and just rule that out.
That's a really good point. And in fact, I've just invested in a camera and I'm going to use it for that very reason.
Another way you can do it, if you just want to see if your dog has separation anxiety or not, is just take a video on your phone, prop your phone up, and then go out. Your phone can record for 10 minutes or so and then come back in and see. If you just want to test, but obviously if your dog has separation anxiety, then I'll go ahead and get the proper pet camera.
Okay, well, those are really good points. Thank you, Nick. That's certainly enlightening. Apart from the most obvious, what are the typical signs that your dog is anxious or suffering from separation anxiety? Say you're watching this video footage at home or you're watching on the camera.
Oh, okay.
Is it blissfully obvious or distressingly obvious, or are there certain things which some people might misinterpret? What should we be looking for?
Sure. I think that, to be fair, I think most people are actually pretty good at identifying their dogs when they're anxious. But things like pacing, excessive drooling, barking, chewing, there is an issue, Rowan, which commonly gets, what's the word, mistaken for separation anxiety. With young dogs, young adolescent dogs, oftentimes those dogs get bored very, very quickly, right? I remember I worked with a Doberman that, as soon as they left, he went through so many of their landline phones because that was like his favorite thing to chew when he went out, right? So that's a little bit different. So if you suspect that your dog is bored, as opposed to anxious, and when you look on the camera, usually you're not going to, with a bored dog, you're not going to see lots of whining or stress signals. You're just going to see them wandering around the house looking for something to occupy them, right? So, but what will work with a dog that is bored, that won't work with a dog that is anxious, are chew toys. You can actually get some really cool toys now. Like there was a toy that worked really well with that Doberman called the Foobler, which basically,
Brilliant.
which basically is a ball which makes a little tone, and then once that tone is made, the treats can fall out of the ball, so the dog can push the ball around and release treats.
Okay.
But there's all kinds of toys, right? Like even from your simple Kong toys, which you can put food in, or there's the canine connectables which do the same thing. If you have a dog that's bored, if you make like 3 or 4 of those, put them wherever you want. Really, the dog doesn't care. Then what? I always made a little toy box, but the dog doesn't really care, Rowan.
Can you imagine he's got his other dog friends around? It's like, my guardian Nick made this for me. It was from his grandfather's toy box. They're all like, bore off, give me the treat.
Then what you'll probably see on your pet camera is your dog working through the chew toys. If your dog's anxious, most dogs that have separation anxiety, they aren't going to take food when you're left because they're just too anxious to do that.
These are some really, really good points. So just to summarize, one, we need to do this plenty and often for short periods. Sure. 2, be aware to avoid simply distracting your dog as opposed to acclimatizing your dog to your departure. And 3, I guess, if you've got a camera, try and identify if it's a question of anxiety or simply boredom. These are really good points. They're very subtle, but obviously they're very essential. So I think definitely. That really gives us quite a route map.
Yeah, I'd also say, Rowan, there is a friend of mine, I would say, is the leading expert on separation anxiety. She's absolutely incredible. Her name is Malena DeMartini. She has a website all about separation anxiety, but she also has a book that came out late last year called Separation Anxiety in Dogs, Next Generation Protocols and Treatments. And her name is Malena DeMartini. I would check that book out, or check, she actually has some online courses as well. She's really, really good for anything separation anxiety related. And it is invaluable to have someone work you through separation anxiety, because once your dog has the problem, it is up there with the toughest problems to solve. And if I'm honest, Rowan, it's probably the problem that most dog trainers hate working with the most, right? So that tells you something. So if your dog doesn't have separation anxiety, please put this work in, as we've said today, to try and prevent it, because it's a really hard problem to work through.
Also, please be aware, and Nick, I must introduce you one of these days. She'd love to meet you. She's really looking forward to it. We've got a in-house behaviourist at Bella+Duke called Caroline Spencer.
Hi, Caroline Spencer, natural canine behaviourist with Bella+Duke.
She is really well loved and respected by our pack. our group, which is now 21,000 people on Facebook. It's amazing. It just seems to have grown. And Caroline is looking after most of these people, and she's doing a lot of separation anxiety, no doubt. I mean, understandably.
Yeah, I saw some of Caroline's articles actually the other day. I was reading her stuff about how to get dogs that are fussy eaters to eat.
Yeah.
And it was really awesome. So yes, really, really nice.
It's really lovely to actually see somebody understand it and boil it down to something really simple, because quite often you read these complicated astrophysical kind of formulas that you need to do this. On the third moon, you turn around 3 times clockwise, and it's actually just don't feed your dog the night before. Keep it really natural and be relaxed and stop staring at them. It's like, oh wow, 99% of these would 99% of dogs actually want to eat food. Stop press.
That's funny you say that, Rowan, because that reminds me of back when I started out dog training and I was shadowing someone, and I went to see this case, and these people had a really fearful dog, and they had put the dog bed right in front of the television. Oh. So all night the dog just thought, these people are staring at me. Right? It really, I think it really was negatively affecting this dog's nervousness, because from the dog's perspective, it just looks like the people are just staring at the dog for hours on end.
Well, how can it not affect the dog? If you look at it from, in my online functional medicine clinic, that the Modern Sensei, before I was working with Bella+Duke, so one thing we saw with poker players, and that a lot of the professional poker players were suffering with some malady or another. And after a while, we ran blood tests and we looked at all of these things. And it was really obvious. They'd just been subjected to electromagnetic frequencies all the time because they're constantly online in front of their computer. So you're getting blue light stimulation from your monitor constantly. So they're never not out of wakefulness. And that blue light is telling you it's the beginning of the day, and it's delaying your melatonin so you can sleep, rest, and repair 12 hours later. So they're constantly getting that surge of energy. It's like constantly being given caffeine. And then you've got all these electromagnetic frequencies, which you can measure in a free app on your phone. So they're off the charts in that. So they're constantly in fight or flight. They're never in rest and repair.
That's really interesting, Rowan. So I think I know about the light thing, because obviously anyone that has issues sleeping, often it's really, everyone knows it's bad to kind of look at your phone before you go to bed. So I've heard of that, but I've not heard of the frequencies thing. So what's that? What kind of impact does that have on people?
Well, this is really interesting, and it sounds a little bit woo-woo mumbo jumbo at first, but I can boil it straight down to the science. We have evolved with a normal electromagnetic frequency, Schumann resonance, which is basically the Earth's polarity. We know we've got a north pole and a south pole. That's why a compass works. Okay? We've all evolved over millions of years with that. So we're used to having this electromagnetic frequency, and it's why grounding works. If you, for instance, you've been on a long flight, one of the quickest ways you can get over jet lag is to actually take your shoes and socks off and ground and discharge all that electromagnetic frequencies that you've accumulated over a really long flight. We've seen this work time and time and time again. Okay, so when you are subjected to lots of, for instance, mobile phone masts, this is nothing to do with COVID's conspiracies whatsoever. Okay. But if you're close to one of those, or power lines, or whichever, you're being subjected to very different frequencies, which will disrupt your natural frequency and will push you out of parasympathetic nervous dominance, which is relaxed, when you're breathing, you're laughing, etc., into something called sympathetic dominance, which is where you're a little bit agitated. So what we did is we got electric magnetic frequency disruptors for people to put in the houses. Like overnight, people had huge symptoms disappear. And we tried this time and time and time again. We've seen it work clinically. And there's quite a lot of scientific evidence about it. It's kind of basic when you think about it.
Yeah, I'd love to read that. That is interesting because, like, I think, as an animal lover, we've all heard about how electromagnetic fields impact migration, right?
Oh,
Like,
of course.
so like I can kind of see where you come from. Like, I don't know anything about it, but it makes sense. Although there are obvious, the other side of me has an instant aversion to the conversation because you start thinking about, like you said, all of those conspiracy theories, which get really wild.
Oh, I know. And this is why we have to tease out fact from fiction. And this is why I just stick to the biochemistry or the physics. And we know, for instance, that bees, and I love this, bees have tiny, tiny bits of iron ferrite in their abdomen. So they can actually circumnavigate and they can find their way around using the Earth's magnetic field. This is why they're affected if you're put close to a huge electrical generator or other. It's not to say these things are evil or whichever. They have fabulous purposes. They save lives. They generate hospitals. They allow you and I to record these podcasts. There's lots of benefits, but it would be foolish for us to gloss over the other side, which is they affect us. And you can test this with your heart rate and how the heart beats using something called heart math. You can do that, but also they affect our pets. To go back to the pets, so say for instance, I leave Kismet in front of a glowing blue light screen with noise and electromagnetic frequencies. Of course, she's going to be in an agitated state. She's going to have less rest, and she's going to be less focused the next day. It kind of makes sense. If you've got kids and you leave them in front of a video game all night, or you actually put them to sleep in a dark room, who's going to perform better the next day?
Yeah, that's very interesting because, especially with puppies, I think sleep is really magnified with puppies because they need so much of it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so what's interesting about that is you see the effects of a lack of sleep almost on a bigger scale, right? Because when puppies are getting their sleep, they become very hyperactive. The puppy biting gets much, much worse. And it's very, very noticeable.
Tired and wired.
Sure. And some puppies seem way better at regulating that themselves, going and finding the quiet place. And some puppies are just like, hanging off your arm, wanting to play tug. So.
Just a final point on this, Nick, and I know time is precious. What we have seen, and this is actually in one of the largest surveys which is being conducted in the last 2 years. We ran, and I think there were over 3,000 respondees. We have seen a huge change. This is from people moving on to raw, transitioning on to raw, in calmness and focus with their dogs. And people have said before, I used to have a hyperactive dog, and now it seems a lot calmer and more focused on raw. And we have a really solid theory behind this. And I've spoken to some leading scientists about it. One, a very, very well-renowned professor. And it makes perfect sense because highly processed food spikes something, an excitatory neurotransmitter, which is the messengers in the brain, called glutamate, whereas raw, in its natural packaged form, is digested slowly and it's assimilated like that without these spikes. Now, I say this, it would be really interesting for if you could give us some feedback over the next few months. If you see this in behavior you must now have thousands of dogs in your courses. So it'd be great to see what the behavior profile is between raw fed dogs and highly processed food fed dogs. Maybe you could help us with that.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that, Rome, because that would be really interesting. And I do find myself more and more often asking people about what they're feeding their dogs. When I go and see dogs that are, very hyperactive, and that's contributing to the behavior issues that they're having. And obviously, recently I've been feeding my dogs a lot of Bella+Duke, and it's really interesting to kind of see the differences because I have always fed high quality, or what I perceive to be high quality foods, right?
Yeah.
High quality foods and whatnot. But there is a difference, you know, that even though I'm not going from something that's really, you know, the worst of the worst, I'm going from something on the higher end, the premium end, you still see a difference when you switch from that to raw. And I know that this is the classic Rowan that everyone talks about, but there is a really obvious difference even in the poo, right? Like really noticeably different. I think that's something that is most shocking for most people when they switch to raw.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's I don't really understand it, Rowan. Why is it that you have such a difference in the poo?
Basically, why is processed food, and this isn't to throw processed food under the bus. And if you're listening and you're feeding your dog processed food, you know what? You're animal lovers and I love you. We're all doing the best we can according to our budgets and our knowledge. And frankly, if people want to ask questions about this, our job is to unite, not to divide. And but it's a simple truth that to actually make a dog biscuit or any kibble, you need at least 35% carbohydrate or starch. Now, then this gets highly baked, which makes it even harder for dogs to digest. Now, I know I've gone on in past about dogs not having amylase to digest this. That's not entirely true. They do have some amylase, but simply not enough to be able to break all of this down. So what you end up is something called an undigested bolus, B-O-L-U-S, of huge fillers, be it peas, be it lentils, be it grains, be it corn, be it maize, whichever. So this acts as a massive bolus which goes through the dog's intestine, and they simply can't digest all of it. Now, with raw food, there are no fillers in it. There are some carrots, yes, and some dogs are going to be better at digesting those than others. There might be some blueberries or things like this, but all of these are kind of solubly fibers. And it means that the quantity that's transiting through the dog's gut is a lot less, and it's a lot more absorbable and assimilated. The dog can digest it. So what you end up with is a lot less byproduct. So you can take the same amount of food, and let's not lose sight of the fact it's naturally high in moisture. So this is something we always gloss over, is raw food is in its natural state. It's about 75-ish% moisture. And this is why it works for cats, because the desert creatures, and they're dependent on their food for hydration. This is why cats get kidney disease on processed foods, in my opinion. So all of those three things, the moisture content, the digestibility, the lack of fillers and carbohydrates, mean that your dog just produces a way smaller stool. And because it's not super fermented, it doesn't actually smell the same either, does it?
No. And it also, you know, if you do leave it in the back garden or something like that, it decomposes a lot quicker, doesn't it? It just goes into that chalky, just, you know, you can pretty much stand on it and it just disappears. Whereas
I see you've done your own experiments here, Nick. We've had the carrot confession, then I've decided not to pick it up, and I've been going around stamping on stuff in my garden. I find it is a great anger management tool. I've just had a very rude client. I'm going to show them. I'm going to go out and stamp around my lawn. I've ruined my slippers. Nick Benger.
That's hilarious. That is hilarious.
Okay.
I don't know where to go from that, Rowan, to be honest.
I just have this Rumpelstiltskin anger management thing going on. I think it's best we leave it there, Nick. Nick, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure. It's really nice to be, it's genuinely a pleasure. I feel very humbled to meet like-minded people who are interested in the welfare of animals and are just here to push the wheel together, hopefully educate, hopefully bring some entertainment to people. And we're here for questions. So
Brilliant.
Nick, thank you. I'm looking forward to doing another episode with you, and I'd love to do that live we were talking about.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you, Rowan.
Okay. On that note, everybody, please come and join our Facebook group. We are absolutely hell-bent, if I'm allowed to use that term, on being the most welcoming, the most open, the most educational group on Facebook. It doesn't matter if you're feeding raw, it doesn't matter if you're feeding Bella+Duke or not. We're here simply for the good of the animals. So come and join and ask some questions. And if we can help, we will. On that note, we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Nick, thank you once again.
Thank you.
Bye all.